This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform where entrepreneurs can easily create and customize their own personal and professional website. More on Squarespace later in the video. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today we're diving into some Roman and Greek history, our protagonist being Mithridates the Great, the Roman Republic's deadliest enemy, with a script penned by Radu Alexander. So be sure to give Radu your thanks for this script because he does not have socials yet for you to follow. With that said, let's get to it. Mithridates was a man about whom one cannot speak except with concern nor yet pass by in silence. He was ever eager for war, of exceptional bravery, always great in spirit and sometimes in achievement. In strategy, a general. In bodily prowess, a soldier. In hatred to the Romans, a Hannibal. Mithridates, the king of Pontus, took a small kingdom and turned it into a regional power right on Rome's doorstep. He was ambitious, cunning, at times ruthless, and pursued his goals with an unrelenting tunnel vision that ultimately became his downfall. In the end, Mithridates did not best Rome. It had simply become too powerful. But he went down as an unyielding and implacable symbol of defiance that made even his greatest enemies fear and respect him. Mithridates VI Eupator Dionysus, also spelled Mithridates, which will be on screen thanks to our amazing editor Jen, was born circa 135 BC in the kingdom of Pontus, probably in the capital city of Sinope. Pontus is not one of the better known kingdoms of the ancient world, so some of you may be wondering what and where it is. Fortunately for us, the Greek historian and geographer Strabo happened to be from Pontus, so he was able to provide the world with a detailed description of his homeland. Pontus was divided both culturally and geographically into two regions, the coast and the interior, with the two of them physically separated by the Pontic Alps. The coast was rich in food and resources, so most of the big cities were located there, and they were Greek, whereas the Persian culture was more predominant throughout the inland region, which was inhabited by the Cappadocians or Cappadocians. It's pronounced either way, and Paphlagonians. As to who lived there before the Greeks and the Persians came around, not even Strabo was sure, describing them as local tribes, which are on the whole just names to us now. In Mithridates' time, Pontus was a relatively small kingdom on the southern coast of the Black Sea, which was called Pontus Euxinus in Latin, occupying a part of the Anatolian Peninsula, also known as Asia Minor. By the time he would be finished, though, Pontus would occupy almost the entire peninsula, plus territories on the northern, western, and eastern coast, almost enveloping the Black Sea. But that's getting ahead of ourselves a bit. Centuries earlier, Pontus and its southern neighbor, Cappadocia, were part of the Persian satrapy, also called Cappadocia, belonging to the Achaemenid Empire, having been conquered by Darius the Great, bioavailable if you wish. By then, the Persian Empire was itself conquered by Alexander the Even Greater, not to be confused with Sir not appearing in this film. Yes, that is a Monty Python reference. And most of Anatolia became part of his domain. But then Alexander died without naming a successor, so many of his top generals began fighting each other for power, as they will want to do, and ended up dividing the empire into smaller chunks. While all of this was going on, ambitious kings and warlords stepped up, looking to get a piece of the pie for themselves, and that is where the Mithridates lineage comes in. The first Mithridates that we know of ruled over a Greek city in Asia Minor named Cius. Mithridates II was the one in charge when Alexander died, and he stayed in charge by becoming a vassal of Antigonus, one of Alexander's aforementioned generals. However, Antigonus soon changed his mind and had Mithridates II killed in 302 BC. He also wanted to kill his son, Mithridates III, but the latter managed to escape and outlasted Antigonus, who himself died the following year. With no pressing threats, Mithridates III traveled to the northern region of Anatolia, where he founded the kingdom of Pontus. And, to make things less confusing, he pressed the reset button on his lineage and became Mithridates I of Pontus. Here on Biographics, we talk in detail about people who shaped the ancient world. But how can you, in this modern day and age, get noticed in our world without having to challenge all of Rome to do it? That's where the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace, comes in. With Squarespace, you can build a professional website at an affordable price. With flexible, easy-to-use tools, your site can be up and running quicker than the presidency of William Henry Harrison. So, what are these tools? Well, Squarespace has introduced a new guided design system they have called Squarespace Blueprint. With this tool, you can choose from professionally curated layouts and styles to build your site easily, from the ground up. Not only will you create a unique website with a few clicks, but your site will also be fully optimized for all devices. Even getting discovered is fast with Squarespace's integrated SEO tools. If you're a creative and want to take the design of your website further, Squarespace also has the tools for that. Their next-generation web design system, Fluid Engine, gives you the power to customize every detail of your pages by simply dragging and dropping them around. If you want your website to look different on desktop and mobile, you can do that with the Fluid Engine too. But we're not done talking about the tools available to you. Squarespace websites can be equipped with a seamless checkout if you want to use your site to sell your products, your services, or your time. When set up, you can accept payments from credit cards, Apple Pay, and PayPal. In eligible countries, your customers can also buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Interested? Well, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code Biographics. Now back to Past Eric. As you can already tell, there are a lot of Mithridateses involved in the story, but this video is only about one of them, so we'll skip ahead until we reach Mithridates V, Eupator, the father of our subject for today. He had a long reign of approximately 3 decades between 150 and 120 BC. He was married to a Seleucid princess named Laodice VI, and Mithridates VII was their eldest son. Unlike his son, Papa Mithridates was an ally of Rome and helped them during the Third Punic War against Carthage. He was assassinated by poison in 120 BC. Junior was around 13 years old when his father died, so his mother ruled as regent. We hop now briefly into the realm of legend to tell you how Mithridates supposedly made himself immune to all poisons. Some historians claimed that his mother was the one behind his father's death, and that she also wanted to do away with him to either claim power for herself or her other son, who you'll be absolutely shocked to find out was also called Mithridates. That's not confusing at all, is it? Anyway, after a few failed attempts on his life, our Mithridates decided to get the hell out of Dodge and lived for years in the wild where it was safer. Eventually, he came of age and returned to successfully claim his throne and had both his mother and brother removed from their positions, to put it politely. However, this experience left Mithridates so paranoid about being poisoned that he became obsessed with toxicology. Following decades of research, he supposedly developed an elixir out of over 50 different ingredients that was a universal antidote to all known toxins, which became known as Mithridate. He ingested this concoction regularly, and this allowed him to consume deadly substances such as arsenic or venoms with no ill effects. So he's basically Greek Batman. It is said that by the end of his life, Mithridates had become completely immune to all poisons. Unfortunately, he never bothered to write the recipe down, so this miraculous panacea has been lost forever. The reality is that we don't know exactly how Mithridates came to rule on his own. Both his mother and brother simply disappeared from the historical record around 115 BC. Whether they were killed, imprisoned, or something else happened entirely, we can't say. But the end result is the same. Mithridates VII, Eupator, was now the king of Pontus. Right off the bat, Mithridates had grand ambitions of growing his empire, and it didn't take him very long because the first opportunity immediately presented itself on a silver platter. The cities and kingdoms on the Crimean Peninsula on the northern coast of the Black Sea were under threat by the Scythians. They didn't really have any good options available to them, so it was more a matter of choosing the one that was the least worst. Therefore, they were willing to give up their independence and accept the rule of Pontus if Mithridates could protect them from the Scythian kingdom led by King Silurus, who I do not know how to pronounce his name because I couldn't find a guide, so Have at it in the comments, pronunciation police. You're welcome. Intended to conquer all of Crimea. Mithridates said sure and went on a warpath, although the actual warring seems to have been done by one of his generals named Diophantus. The Pontic army geared up and marched to Crimea, and since it was on the way, it also subjugated Colchis, a region on the eastern coast of the Black Sea, part of the modern-day Georgia. After that, the Bosporan kingdom on the northeast coast, which was willingly handed over by its king, Parisates. He knew that he did not have the money or soldiers to keep the invading barbarians at bay, so life under Mithridates was preferable since at least Pontus was a Greek civilization like them. The main destination was Chersonesus, the Crimean city that originally requested aid from Mithridates. They also provided the most detailed account of this conflict, thanks to an inscription honoring Diophantus. It says that as soon as the Pontic general arrived in Crimea, he was faced with a surprise attack from Palicus, the son of Silurus, and the new king of Scythia. Diophantus was victorious, thus becoming the first foreign invader to conquer the Scythians. However, the honor went to Mithridates since the boss man collected the credit, even if he wasn't actually there. After warding off the initial strike, Pontus launched a counterattack in the interior of the Crimean Peninsula, deep in Scythian territory. At this point, the ancient account becomes vaguer, simply stating that Diophantus achieved many great things in a short time. The general managed to conquer several Scythian cities, including the capital of Neapolis, and once that was done, all the others surrendered. Crimea was now part of the kingdom of Pontus, so with his job done, Diophantus returned home. This, however, did not last long, or maybe it lasted decades, we're not sure to be honest, since no specific years are mentioned, but at one point the Scythians rebelled against Mithridates, and this time they allied themselves with a group of Samaritan people called, and I could not find a definitive way to pronounce this, but I believe it is Rolian? Correct me if I'm wrong once again. Rolani. Diophantus made his way north once more with an army of 6,000 soldiers matched up against 50,000 Scythians and Rolani. Despite the numbers' disadvantage, the Pontic general defeated his enemies soundly thanks mainly to superior weapons, training, and military skill, and the Scythians were forced to come to terms again. On his way back home again, Diophantus made a pit stop to solve another issue in the Bosporan kingdom, which was experiencing seller's remorse. Parisates, the king who willingly abdicated power to Mithridates, had been assassinated by a group led by a guy named Samachus. They wanted independence again now that the Scythians were no longer a threat, but the no-takesies-backsies rule was in effect, and Pontus was not about to give up any territory without a fight. Diophantus had to wait until Mithridates sent him reinforcements, but once he did, the general crushed the revolt, captured Samachus, and sent him to Pontus, where we assume many unpleasant things happened to him. Although most of the Black Sea coastline was now either part of the Kingdom of Pontus or a protectorate that paid tribute, that was not enough to quell the ambitions of Mithridates. He began looking south and west to the rest of the Anatolian peninsula, and he liked what he saw. There was just one problem though, because now he wanted something that somebody else wanted as well: Rome. At the time, there was one other power in Asia Minor, the Kingdom of Bithynia, ruled by King Nicomedes III. Although he and Mithridates weren't exactly drinking buddies, they also saw no reason to fight each other. For the time being, there was more value in them becoming allies than enemies. So, around 108 BC, the two invaded Paphlagonia, easily conquered it, and divided it between their kingdoms. Afterward, Mithridates subjugated Galatia as well. This kind of activity was bound to attract the attention of the Roman Republic, which considered Asia Minor under its sphere of influence. Plus, it is not surprising that Rome wouldn't want a regional power to grow so close to its own borders. Who knows what ideas it might get. But at the time, Rome wasn't exactly in a position to make demands. It was trying and failing to win a war with Numidia, led by King Jugurtha in northern Africa, so all it could do was wag its finger at Mithridates in a disappointing manner. While Mithridates was busy with Galatia, Nicomedes invaded Cappadocia. The next part gets a little tricky, mainly because we can only speculate on the true intentions of everyone involved. The queen of Cappadocia was Laodice, Mithridates' sister, who ruled as regent for her underage son, Ariathes VII. Her husband, Ariathes VI, had recently been assassinated by a Cappadocian nobleman named Gordius on her brother's orders. Why, we're not sure, but Laodice then agreed to marry Nicomedes. When Mithridates heard about this, he invaded Cappadocia and was successful in driving Nicomedes back to Bithynia, with their alliance officially crumbled. Mithridates restored his young nephew to the throne, but instead of Laodice ruling as regent, the Pontic king insisted that Gordius would assume the role. This could suggest that Mithridates no longer trusted his sister, or perhaps he had a far more devious plan in mind all along. Unsurprisingly, Ariathes VII did not want his father's killer as his regent, and even though he was a kid, he was ready to go to war against his uncle. Things never got that far though, because Mithridates had him assassinated around 100 BC. The Pontic king then installed his own underage son, also called Ariathes IX, as the new ruler of Cappadocia, with Gordius as his regent, so it is possible that this was Mithridates' intention all along. Cunning as it might be, the plan didn't work. The Cappadocians did not want Ariathes IX as their king, and the underage monarch had trouble holding on to his power when daddy wasn't around. Instead, he was deposed by, that's right, it's Ariathes the 5, 6, 7, 8th, the younger brother of Ariathes the 7th, son of Ariathes the 6th, and cousin to Ariathes the 9th. Confusing enough for you? Don't worry, it's almost over. This compelled Mithridates to invade Cappadocia again and put his son back on the throne. Driven into exile, Ariathes VIII died of an unknown disease. Mithridates might have hoped that this would finally calm things down, but if anything, they were only about to get much worse. All the shenanigans in Cappadocia finally prompted Rome to stand up and say enough is enough. The Senate delivered a warning to Mithridates: be stronger than the Romans or obey their commands in silence. At first, Mithridates tried diplomacy. He and Nicomedes sent envoys to Rome to argue why their candidates were legitimate enough to claim the Cappadocian throne. Rome, however, was having none of it, and decided that if they couldn't play nice together, then neither one could have it. The Senate ruled that Pontus and Bithynia must restore independence not only to Cappadocia, but to Paphlagonia as well, or else. This was a fork in the road for Mithridates. Did he obey or defy Rome? He chose to obey, for now. No point in starting a fight he couldn't win. He returned his troops to Pontus and saw Rome install a puppet king named Ariobarzanes in Cappadocia. If Mithridates wanted to take them on and stand a chance, he would need time to prepare and find new allies. His first ally came in the form of Armenia, which was starting to emerge as a powerful kingdom under its new king, Tigranes II. Mithridates wasted no time in securing an alliance by marrying Tigranes to his daughter, Cleopatra. No, not that one. He even persuaded Tigranes to invade Cappadocia and restore Ariathes IX to the throne. But then the Romans came along and installed Ariobarzanes again. This would happen a few times over the next few years as the two sides played hot potato with Cappadocia. Mithridates didn't offer any resistance when the Romans came. For the moment, he was content with building up his army and forging new alliances. In 90 BC, a Roman legation led by a general named Manius Achilles was really pushing his buttons. At this point, both Rome and Pontus knew that war had become inevitable, but each side wanted to have a casus belli, aka a justification for war. Achilles' actions were likely intended to provoke an armed response from Mithridates. He even convinced the new king of Bithynia, Nicomedes IV, to invade and plunder lands belonging to Pontus, something which Nicomedes was compelled to do because he owed Rome a lot of money for keeping him in power. The armed response from Mithridates did not come, at least for now. Instead, he allowed Bithynia to trample his lands so he could play the victim card. This way, he could lodge an official complaint with the Senate against Bithynia, while also gaining sympathy from local kingdoms, particularly the Greeks, who were getting fed up with how Rome kept swinging its short sword around. willy-nilly. Mithridates ran a good PR campaign, and he made a few friends. Armenia, Parthia, Ptolemaic Egypt, the Seleucids, and the Greeks were on his side. Or more accurately, they were against Rome. The enemy of my enemy and all that. Only one thing was left now, and that was war. And it began in 89 BC, as was tradition, with the invasion of Cappadocia and kicking out Ariobarzanes. After that came Bithynia, and then the rest of Asia Minor, which could offer little resistance to a force that had been preparing for almost a decade. It was at this point that the kingdom of Pontus reached the peak of its power, with control over almost all of Anatolia plus the coasts of the Black Sea. Mithridates had picked his opportunity well. Rome was busy with the social war against other Italian tribes that lasted until 87 BC. It couldn't immediately send troops to Asia Minor, so the Pontic king had almost 2 years to gain as much ground as possible. And in 88 BC, Mithridates planned and carried out the massacre known as the Asiatic Vespers, targeting Romans and Latin speakers in Asia Minor. Between 80,000 and 150,000 people were killed, depending on the source. There was no going back. The first Roman response came from Manius Achilles, since he was in the area and was itching to go to war against Pontus anyway. Well, he certainly got his wish, only to discover that he was severely outnumbered and got curb-stomped on the battlefield. Achilles fled, tail tucked between his legs, to the safety of the Greek islands, except that there was no safety to be had. He tried hiding in Mytilene, but the people there hated the Romans as much as Mithridates did, so they captured the Roman general and turned him over to Pontus. Mithridates paraded Achilles as a prisoner of war and then had him executed, supposedly by pouring molten gold down his throat. This was just the starter, though, and Rome was getting ready to deliver the main course, a large army commanded by General Sulla. So far, we've been talking about all the capers and conspiracies that were going on in Asia Minor, but Rome was dealing with its own monkey business at the time. There was a lot of infighting, intrigues, and betrayals going on, which culminated with the first large-scale civil war in Rome's history, won by the aforementioned Sulla. If you want to learn about that, we have a bio on him ready to go. Anyway, the First Mithridatic War took place mostly in Greece, specifically a region called Boeotia. Mithridates had a lot of Greek allies who wanted to escape from under the Roman yoke, or at least he thought he did. As Sulla made his way through Greece, most cities quickly surrendered without a fight. One exception was Athens, which Sulla had to besiege for almost a year before finally emerging triumphant. He then gained 2 decisive victories at the battles of Chaeronea and Aramenos. Another general named Fimbria bested Mithridates as well, and the war was pretty much won. Sulla could have eliminated Mithridates right then and there if it hadn't been for treachery back in Rome. In the years he was gone, Sulla's enemies stripped him of his command and gave another general named Flaccus the ambitious task of dealing with both Sulla and Mithridates. He never got the chance. His men mutinied, and he was assassinated by the aforementioned Fimbria. As far as Sulla was concerned, Mithridates was a problem, but he had an even bigger problem back in Rome. So he offered the Pontic king good terms for a speedy resolution: surrender all the territories gained in the war, restore the kings of Cappadocia and Bithynia, pay Sulla 2,000 talents, and give him 70 warships. Given the circumstances, this was the best Mithridates could hope for, so he agreed, and thus the First Mithridatic War ended in 85 BC. The Second War was a lot shorter. When Sulla departed for Rome, he left a guy named Murena in charge of Asia Minor with 2 legions. But he started conducting unauthorized raids into Mithridates' territory under the pretense that the Pontic king was building up his forces for war with Rome again. In reality, Mithridates was dealing with revolts in Colchis and Bosporus, but he still felt compelled to retaliate and actually won this time. He drove all the Roman garrisons out of Cappadocia, and of course, he also deposed the king since it had become a custom by this point. Eventually, a Roman envoy arrived and settled the matter. He recalled Murena back to Rome for acting without senatorial approval and put Ariobarzanes on the throne of Cappadocia for the 3rd or 4th time. Maybe. We've lost count at this point. And so, the Second Mithridatic War ended in 81 BC. The third one was the biggie. Both sides felt justified in attacking the other. Mithridates had allied himself with Sertorius, a Roman rebel who was public enemy number one as far as the Senate was concerned. And Mithridates was angry because Rome planned to annex Bithynia, which would have made them neighbors, so he invaded to stop this from happening. This was in 73 BC, 8 years after the end of the Second War, so Mithridates had plenty of time to regain his strength. The conflict initially went his way. Mithridates delivered a serious blow to the Roman forces in Asia Minor at the Battle of Chalcedon, where he practically destroyed the entire Roman fleet in the region. After that, he conquered city after city virtually unopposed. But then Roman reinforcements arrived and the tide started to turn. Sulla was dead by this point. Instead, the Roman armies were led by two of his former proteges, a general named Lucullus and a promising up-and-comer named Pompey. Lucullus set the tone with a victory at the Battle of Rindicus, which then allowed him to enter Pontus itself, forcing Mithridates to retreat to Armenia. It took Lucullus a few years to get Pontus under control, but in 69 BC, he invaded Armenia. He gained several important victories, but this time he was outmaneuvered by Mithridates, who launched a surprise attack on Pontus. Following a decisive win at the Battle of Zela in 67 BC, Mithridates regained his kingdom and drove back the Romans. After Lucullus's failure, Pompey was placed in command of the campaign against Mithridates, and he was determined to end it once and for all. And to give him credit, he did. Pompey's army, and let's be honest, his military prowess, was superior in every way, and he scored victory after victory against Mithridates, pushing him deeper and deeper into his empire, from Pontus to the eastern coast of the Black Sea, and then finally to Crimea. Everyone except Mithridates could see the writing on the wall. This time, King Tigranes of Armenia didn't allow Mithridates into his kingdom. He didn't want none of Pompey, and instead, he sued for peace and became a client of Rome. To add insult to injury, Mithridates' own son, Machaerus, king of Bosporus, refused to help his father, and another son, Pharnacus, even rebelled against him to try to end the war and salvage what was left of the empire. It had become clear that Mithridates had pushed too far, and someone much bigger pushed back. Faced with capture, the Pontic king committed suicide in 63 BC. Legend goes that Mithridates tried to poison himself, but his immunity proved too strong, so instead, he had his bodyguard stab him with his sword. Out of respect, Pompey had his body delivered to Pontus, where Mithridates received a royal funeral and was buried in the tombs of the kings of Sinope, because Pompey admired his great achievements and considered him the first of the kings of his time. Well, I certainly hope you found this video to be as entertaining and informative as I did. And if you did, be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.